Thank you for joining me here on the debut season of the UX Coach podcast. In this, our final episode, I'm in conversation with Dylan Wilbanks. Dylan has been part of the digital design community since the mid-90s. A frequent writer, Dylan was present a lot in the speaker circuit, but in recent years has chosen to step down to make way for new voices, something he is greatly passionate about supporting. I reached out to Dylan after he made a comment that he had reluctantly accepted his first job as a manager. For someone who's been driving change and leading design for almost 20 years, I was fascinated to find out where this statement came from. We covered a lot of ground, and there were so many things that we explored that it has genuinely been a challenge to edit this down, and I really didn't want to go full-blown Sam Harris on you all. Instead, we'll just pick up with a little bit of background. Here we go. Dylan, thank you very much for joining me today. If we can, would you mind just introducing yourself? Tell us where you are and what you're doing at the moment.
I'm Dylan Wilbanks. I am a the official title is Product Design Manager for a company here in the States called Back Office Associates that does data governance and master data management, a lot of really boring enterprise data stuff that I actually find is really cool, which is why I'm doing product design for them. I'm based in Seattle. It's an entirely remote company. There's people around the world working out of their basements, just like me. Their basements and their dining rooms. Got a small team there. I'm obviously in Seattle, so I've been here in Seattle for about 20-something years. I came up as a web designer entirely on accident. My university degree is environmental studies with a minor in classics. So I found that combination of understanding Western United States water law and the fifth declension of Latin are pretty useless in my career and have always been. But I discovered the web, I guess, 25-ish years ago. And this career path has taken me from building things to designing things to, I guess at this point, explaining to an organization how they should understand and focus on users and build an organization that's actually going to be capable of delivering on the promises that they have for their customers.
That is definitely a windy, windy road from coming out of school, but it seems to be quite a common pattern for many people. It's something that you end up falling into at some point in time and you never leave.
Yeah.
Being that there is no formal education path into digital design or web design at the moment, or nothing that's particularly concrete, you're always going to end up coming from somewhere. It's just kind of nice that it's not the case of that it's loads of people who went and studied graphic design and wanted to do really great print campaigns that have then had to sort of learn a bunch of things. We've got other avenues in, and I don't see that as being a bad thing.
I think it's a really great thing. I mean, of course, part of it too is I have a very liberal arts attitude towards design. I feel like one of the tensions we're in right now is between whether or not we are liberal arts, whether we are the classical arts and sciences sort of program, or if there's a deeper, more scientific piece to it, or more of an engineering piece. And I'm more of, I'm somebody who's found that the best people I've worked with have humanities backgrounds, less than being engineers. So, it's a personal preference for me. But then again, I have an environmental studies major with a minor in classics, so I'm going to be biased.
So what was the first job that you picked up?
The first real permanent role, I think, was awfully late in the game. I got into the web mid-90s, and then I just kind of let it sit for a while. I didn't really there's probably an alternate reality. It's like that old Gwyneth Paltrow movie, Sliding Doors, where they, one goes through a tube and the other one goes through another, and then that magically their hair color changes. There's probably some version of me that took a look at the web in 1994 and said, "This is what I want to be for the rest of my life," and loaded my truck up and went to San Francisco. And I would be in a completely different place now. That version of me instead, the version of me that went that way instead, ended up traveling the world, took a bunch of odd jobs, and then eventually one day had a friend call up and say, "We have a startup. We really need bodies to come in and help us essentially hand code HTML because we're a content site, and this was right before CMSs became a thing." So I started off making $12.50 an hour, taking people's articles out of MS Word and turning them into well-formed HTML. And along the way, learned a bunch of tricks. Eventually, suddenly was handed the keys to a pretty substantial website that I had to, 6,000 pages at the time, which was a lot because there's 6,000 written articles. And nowadays, most of these places are 6 million plus. But we had almost 1 million readers, I think, at that point. So everything I did was like, if I put the key in and I turned it and I pushed the button, that was a major thing for the organization and for our readers. So, and they let me do all this, as somebody who just barely knew what they were doing. And then, it was the first .com boom. So it was a lot of wasting money, a lot of burning out. And then the bubble popped. I went to another job that I got laid off from and ended up washing up on the shores of a university where they needed somebody who could talk to them about how they should be running their website for this tiny little public health school as part of the University of Washington. That's where it got interesting from then on, because then it became about learning. Like, it's great. You've learned how to build things, and in HTML. And, by the end of it, I built a CMS. By the end of it, I had rebuilt the site twice. I had restructured the content twice. I was actually starting to do real research around why are people actually coming here and what are they doing? I mean, I really backdoored into UX research.
That's crazy.
And it's a funny story because how I turned into a UX designer. I went to, and they're like, we want you to come in basically because you know all this stuff, but we really need people who understand UX. And it was a startup called Aptio, which at the time was fairly small. I mean, it wasn't a big company, but it was getting there and it was growing very rapidly. And I remember thinking to myself, is UX something I really want to do? Am I really qualified to do this? And Alex Hahn Smith, and she was working at Amazon at the time, by the way. So I'm dropping all the names. And I said, I don't know if this is really what I want to do. And she looks at me in that Alex Hahn way and goes, "Dude, you already are. You do this, 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 and this." And I went, okay. So from then I was doing UX. I've been doing it for years. It's just I didn't know we had a name for it.
I think the point that you make there of like it's what I'd always been doing is true of most people of the same generation, of the early few generations, because it's actually having a similar conversation with someone today around the job title of interaction designer and what really is that now, because it's not graphic design, it's something else, and ultimately it's all rolling into one thing. I think UX designer as a term is very much becoming the equivalent of what we would always have described as being a web designer, right? It's the person that makes the thing for the web and everything that is involved in making that happen.
I think the problem with it is less that we always have this conversation. It's that we have never stopped having this conversation. And is this really all we do? I mean, we crave that definition. And I think the reality is that definition is never going to come. Generalization that happens with all of us, because I think everybody in this part of the industry has to have enough of a set of skills to be able to handle the fact that we don't have enough people to do exact one specialized thing. But then at some point you have to decide whether you want to keep going that path and keep expanding outward, or if you want to zero into something you're really interested in. And when people ask me what I should do, I'm like, yes, choose one. It really doesn't matter. The real truth is, where do you want to grow next, more than where do you want to go next? I have these people, I was in a bit of a conversation today with people who are like, I want to be a VP when I grow up, or I want to be a design director when I grow up. And I'm like, why? Why do you want to do that? And I don't mean it like, why do you want to do that? That's a bad idea. But no, literally, why at this point in your career do you feel like this is the right goal to aim at? What's the positive for you? Is it money? Is it prestige? Is it learning? Because I can tell you the first two aren't all that great. But learning and growing and expanding your skill set and getting better at particular skills is going to make you far better a person and far more agile in your career than simply going after a title. Titles are, and these aims like that are really hard to deal with, I think, for people, because they think the status comes from the title. And the hardest lesson I've learned in my career has been that status does not come from title. Status comes from your ability to learn and lead in the position that you're in.
Right. For sure. One of the things that I find frustrating about those kinds of statements is that being the VP of anything it can't be a tangible goal, because like you say, it's a title, it's a job role. But what you need to be really asking yourself is, what are the things that I want to be doing in any given day that give me energy and that interest me? And I kind of feel like if you're going in that creative director, that's considered as being like a strategic role. But then what does strategy really mean? Because with this whole UX field is something where you're flitting between the two all the time, right? You have to be thinking about, why are we doing this? Who are we doing it for? Where's this going? How's it going to generate revenue? And then at the same time go, cool, how am I going to now make this thing to be able to do that? That's kind of what it is. So if strategy is what you want to go into, that's great, but it doesn't mean that role is the only way of getting into it. And then, like you say, VP to me is just someone deciding that they want an extra 50k a year to whatever they're getting now, and probably to do a lot less work for it.
One of the things you have to learn is, the more quote unquote power you think you have, or status that you have, the more people are going to walk up to you and put their boot in your ass. I was thinking about that recently, because a lot of where I am now in my career looks more and more like product management. In fact, feels like the track that I'm probably on is now heading more for being somebody who's going to run a product team and less of a design team. But I also look at how product managers are treated in these design, product, engineering organizations, and they typically are seen as people who are in power, who are also too dumb to understand how the things really work.
Right.
It's the problem of, once you become a general, you become the very, very model of a very major general almost instantaneously. It doesn't matter if you've been a great field leader, if you have understand and have, camaraderie with people under you. The moment you put on those stars, the moment everybody walks up to you and just launches straight into Gilbert and Sullivan, no matter what you say, because you are an idiot.
Yeah.
And I said, that's one of the great things that always frightened me with getting power was, that sort of leadership was, the moment I do this, am I still doing the right thing? Am I still going to be able to speak to the things I care about, while also having to do things like protect my team and run things down and make sure that that design in the organization is well represented, and the team is successful far more than I am.
Taking that analogy forward, have you found, or have you been in fear of the sense of that you, with this progression, you've effectively ended up with a desk job? The irony being, obviously, that most of us sit at desks, but thinking of you're not in the field anymore. You're sat behind a desk, telling a load of people that are in another country which way to march.
I worry about that. I think what's helped me in the current position I'm in is we're small enough where still need my hands to do work. I know some really good people in design management who struggle with that balance, actually. I worked with a really great design manager, great designer, great head for this stuff. But the struggle with him every day was trying to get him to choose one of the two sides, because at that moment he was doing the thing I didn't. He was doing the opposite of what I needed and the team actually needed. In a capitalist system, organizations want to maximize the return on the capital that they invest in, and that includes human capital.
Right.
And in that sort of world, they're going to try to find ways to squeeze these people, and it becomes really tough, because there are moments when, as a quote unquote desk person, I want to actually be in the field. The thing, at least, though, is less about I need to be in the field because they're not doing it right. It's more like I need to be in the field because they need someone to stand next to them and shoot. When I talk to people who want to go into leadership, that's one of the things I'm looking for is that move for you, is that yearn about wanting to micromanage and microcontrol every decision that your team makes? Or is it about missing that thrill and that anguish and that sense of utter doom that you don't know what you're doing, and then turning around and handing it to another designer and saying, this actually looks good, you might want to think about that, and that immense elation that immediately comes that I'm not so bad at this after all. Or that feeling of when you get into a room and you're doing a critique and everyone in the room just kind of nods and goes, I think we all understand this and we all get it. And there's this sort of fusion that happens. Or just that feeling of actually getting success from a user test and going, is that what you miss? Because if you miss that, you should be a leader. If you miss the ability to tell people exactly what they should do with their lives, you probably aren't going to be a good people manager.
Yeah, I'd say you maybe want to start looking at going and working at a high school, because that's all you have to do. When I first got in touch with you, it's because I brought up this topic and the questions and conversations around seniority and whether there's such a thing as a mid-weight designer, and at what point do you stop being one. You said, I finally agreed to management. I held off as long as I could. And I thought that was such an interesting statement. Based on what you've just said, what was it that made you change your mind in all the things that have been going on in the past with your previous roles?
I think ultimately, one, I decided that I didn't know the unknown, that I had been afraid of what I would turn into if I did this, that I was afraid of what would happen to me. Because of that, I actually had the unknown. That is, I almost had created a sort of, this is what managers are. But the more I looked around, the more I said, I don't have to be like everybody else. I could just be me.
Right.
And two, realizing that I didn't have to do this forever. That is, I could give it a shot, see how it goes. And if in another year or two, or, 3 months even, I could say, you know what, I'm just going to go back. I'm going to go back to the individual contributor level. And I think I lived in a lot of fear because I see how people are treated, and I see how we treat people in leadership, in design, and that there is a real disconnect from the people who are on stage, people who are managing people in offices, and the rank and file designer, and that they misunderstand what leadership really is. And I've stepped away from speaking. I've stepped away from being that person on stage. I was for a while, and I've left that. I mean, I've mainly focused on just writing because it's much more something I can control, obviously. That fear, I think, of I'm going to become one of them started to affect my ability to understand that I have control over what it is that I want to do. I can experiment. I can try. And most of all, I can grow. Before this current gig, I actually was working on my own. And for about a year, I tried starting my own thing up. And it was a moderate success. It was the usual struggle you have in a company after years. You spend a lot of time with a lot of work and then a lot of time with no work at all. And it just goes back and forth, and it's very feast or famine. But I learned a lot during that experience. I learned better who I was. I learned more of how design works in organizations and how it can work better. And it wasn't the worst thing I'd ever done, and it wasn't a risk. And so I think that affected my ability coming in, where I was very reticent about taking a management job. The more the organization pushed me at, no, you are somebody who should be able to do this, and we believe in your ability to do it, the more I said, all right, let's give it a whirl. And if it doesn't work, what's the worst that can happen?
I'm guessing that, like a lot of people that have gone through that experience, I certainly, reflecting on my own, I think one of the biggest things I've learned is to have a little bit more confidence in that unknown, because once you start being responsible for our business, regardless of whether it's just you or a whole bunch of people, you start to realize that actually, like, nothing really bad can happen.
Yeah.
there's you sort of gain a bit more confidence in it, as well as having perhaps a little bit more appreciation for the realities of business and the stresses and strains that the others are going through, which I think for the first half of my career, if I look at it that way, I was completely ignorant to, and I would give people unbelievable amount of grief about the way that they were running the businesses that I was sat in, or that working for clients, and you look at the way in which they sort of operate, and it baffles you and frustrates you. Having now done it myself, and this is now the third time that I think I've attempted to do it myself, I've got a lot more appreciation for it. I feel like I've mellowed. Maybe that's one of the sort of the changing factors in how you determine whether you are ready for that kind of role, or whether you're still wanting to expand and develop those practitioner skills.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think when you come in when you're young, you do have that sort of brash, angry young attitude towards things, that you really feel like that there is a set of things that you're out to solve, that you have a real good grasp of it, and then you slam headlong into the cold hard reality of how organizations actually work, how business actually works, et cetera, et cetera. And some people flee from that, and some people just continue to bite down on it, and others learn. And I think part of that learning process is learning what it is that interests you about that conversation that you're always caught in, right? 10 years ago, I would be the sort of person who would probably stand on a desk and scream at somebody if they were not doing what I thought was the right thing for the customer. Today, I essentially told one of our teams that this is why we're going to do the things that we do. These are the reasons why, from a business and a user standpoint. These are the pains that'll happen if we don't do it. And that's why I'm going to hold a hard line on this one. This is a hard gate that I'm not going to let people pass without explaining to me why their particular route is better. And when you get into business and you start learning this is how people talk, and they start convincing each other, and this is how these communication interactions happen. I think it was Mule Girl, Erica Hall, who was saying something to the effect, or maybe it was, I'm attributing it to her, that the further along you get in your career, the more you hear people say that relationships are the most important thing. I think there's some people who don't really want to do that. And I think it's actually okay. I think those are the people who are going to grind down more on getting better and sharper at particular ways that we do design, particular ways that we do research, being a tools maven. I think there are people who don't want to be involved in that tug of war between the product and the people. And they're going to want to not be in the room when those conversations are happening. And that's okay too. I think that there's all kinds here. I think the important thing, though, in all this is to be somebody who, it's not about being happy. It's about being optimistic in what you do. Leadership is not about being up front. Leadership is about getting people around ideas, convincing, reproofing, whatever you need to do. And I think in finding where that is, I think that that's crucial.
I think I can relate to that, and some of the thoughts that I've had around this concept of seemingly never-ending cycle of being a designer or midweight designer, and then what does it mean to be a senior designer or a lead designer? And I guess what we're saying here is like it doesn't actually matter. Like you could just be called a designer for your entire life. Over that period of time, you're going to round out and mellow as an individual, and you're going to start thinking beyond the execution of an instruction on the thing that you have to make, and start having wider conversations. So what is in a title on that basis then? Do we need them at all? Is there really a need for career paths in design, so to speak, in the way that we are often thinking about it, and the people that you're speaking to regularly are looking at it, of that person that's saying that they want to work their way to being VP of digital or senior designer or lead researcher? Do we even need those titles?
I think the problem is we do. And the reason is that there's a necessity in business for taxonomy. And there's a necessity for us to have something about us that declares who we are. Now, that said, I actually agree with you. I think I would rather, what's a senior designer? I've been really clear. It's like, it's not 5 to 7. It's not once you hit year 5 or year 7, you're a senior designer. I should be able to see you start doing things I expect a senior designer should be doing. And you may start doing those things at 2 or 1 or when you walk in the door, or you may never get there. And that's how I would see things working. And, it's less, I think the problem, it's a two-edged sword with titles. Titles help people understand what it is you do and what your actual role is in an organization from a taxonomical perspective. But it also stigmatizes you. You don't know how many people I've talked to where I came in and I interviewed for a UX designer role, and it turned out that the entire job was just graphic design, or the entire job was just front-end code. And I am a researcher. I care about these things. And they go, yeah, that's because it's this two-edged sword. People believe they need these titles. We need to be able to differentiate. And yet, those titles stigmatize at the same time. And I don't like them. I wish there were a way we didn't have to have them. But it's the same token of, why is there a CEO? Why is there a chief financial officer? Why is there a vice president of marketing? It's because at some point along the way, somebody's got to be in the pulpit. If I had my druthers, I would run every design team flat, and I would have a mix of people. Not to get meta on you, but I always talk about total football and the concepts around Ajax in the 70s, where instead of it being hard roles that particular players had in the field, people moved into and out of gaps and into positions so defenders could score and strikers would defend. And it worked really well, because what it said is, at any given time, you hold the formation, but you play a different role. And there are things you do better than others. But in a world like that, if as design moves through an organization, it will move through that sort of flat total football style organization, less in terms of a hierarchy and more in terms of moving between the right people who should be touching it.
See, I get that. Like that, I always find there's so much talk that's gone on over the last couple of years, and I've been exposed to a few companies that have been attempting to introduce holacracy as a model. And my biggest concern with them is, with the football analogy, ultimately, bar the person who's in goal, if we're talking about soccer, everyone does the same thing. You run forwards, backwards, left, right, in diagonal angles, and you kick a ball with one of or both your feet. So on that basis, the pitch is literally a level playing field, and you can go anywhere and you can complete that function, because everyone does the same function. Whereas when we look at a product team, they're not the same. So it's not the same as having a defender and a midfielder and a striker, because actually the defenders are responsible for writing back end code and machine code, and the midfielders are doing front end design, and they're sort of dabbling in between, because now suddenly they have to learn React and shit like that, and it's sort of blurring between. But ultimately it's like everyone has very different specialist roles. And I find that that's a really challenging environment. And I think that having the flat structures, whilst it sounds like a great idea, because everyone is actually a specialist, even though, like, you know, we're saying we don't want to be, it's really hard to be able to move around. I mean, I love it. I love the idea of, like, sure, I'll go and build a wall. I have never done it before, but I'll throw some concrete together and see what happens. But it's not for everyone.
Yeah, and I mean that's the struggle of Agile. I think is Agile wants that exact experience. When I talk about Total Football, I'm thinking less about the engineers and the product team and everyone else is on the field with us. I think more that the design team is on its own field. So in that sense, the specialization is there. Even then, yeah, you run into the problem. Certain people are really good at visual design. Certain people are really good at information architecture. Certain people are really
Sure.
good at research. They should be doing the things that they do. But I also think of it as in an organization, good ideas should come from anybody. It's up to those people. It's up to good people in an organization to identify the good ideas and turn them into great ideas and things that get implemented. You know, that's another thing I talk about a lot. Is this is one of those things you learn over your career. Is you learn more and more that while designers are really good at perfecting, we're not always great at coming up with in terms of designs.
That's true.
I mean, I tell this, you know, I tell the stories over and over again. Like I go into a review meeting with developers, and they'll say, "What about this?" And I go, "Oh, I like that idea. Let's do that." Go back and rework the design, and it's like, it's being able to say in that position, we're willing to be flexible. We don't want to have a hard structure of what we want to be. And what the design world wants to do with our nomenclature, with our taxonomy, is to attach names and labels to things so that we can very carefully box in who people are. And in a more ontological world that we're moving into, it really should be more about what are the characteristics of us and how do they relate to others? And what are the new characteristics about myself, the new skills, the new experiences that I want to have? How do I bring those in? And I think that's where the struggle is for me with job title is I want to find people who are willing to play on design's pitch, knowing that there will be things that they will have to do because that's what they're great at. There are going to be things that they want to learn, and we'll find ways to do that. And then there are things they're never ever want to do ever again in any other job, and we have to keep that in mind. All while keeping in mind that the same conversations are happening throughout the organization in their own ways, some of which have hard structures, some of which have very soft structures. So as someone who's coming, you know, once you hit that midweight, as you all call it, or I mean, we don't really have a word for it. We have junior, senior, and principal over here. Everybody turns senior at 3 years. Congratulations, or 2. The problem is that once you hit that particular level, which is that midweight level, you are essentially being asked, what is it do you want to do next? Like, where do you actually want to go? What's actually interesting to you? And when people come to me for career advice, I always ask them to make this list. And it's like, on one list, write all the things that you love to do and you're good at. On the next list, write everything you want to learn. Like, where do you want to grow? Like, what are the things that you wish you knew that you really want to know? And on the third list, write all the things you never, ever want to do again. As a manager right now, I'm trying to figure out how to bring and better engage user experience with our engineering and product teams. I'm not a UX researcher by training. What do I need to do that? Do I need to bring somebody in? Do I need to get some training? What do I do? But it's an opportunity. It's a frontier for me to experience. I think when you hit that midway point, that's when those conversations start happening because you know enough from a junior of what you do and do not like. And from then on, the conversation becomes, all right, what is the next version of you going to look like? When I came up as a Gen Xer in America, we were the last generation that was told that you'd have 1 or 2 jobs for your entire life. You would have a career. And it's been weird for me that I've been doing the same thing for 20 years, even though I've had 7 different jobs. I think too often we talk to designers in that way of, well, go join our design program and you'll be a designer for life. And the reality is you may be one for 10 years, maybe one for 2, but something else will interest you.
Well, there's a good possibility that this entire thing won't exist in 5 years anyway. There's so many innovations at the moment, in particular with like the concept of design automation, and we talk about the fear of automation in jobs. And I think I saw a statistic a couple of days ago, something like 47% of jobs in the United States could be automated within 10 to 15 years of job types. So not like actual suddenly 47% of the country's unemployed, but the types of jobs. But we keep thinking that we're good, we're safe because we're designing the things that are creating that automation. But in actual fact, we are slowly automating ourselves out of it as well. There's so much design automation coming along.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's why like yourself, the concept of like these transitions into slightly more abstract roles, I suppose, is one way of looking at it, of like product manager and product owner. To a certain extent, things like service designers as well. We've got new avenues to be able to take the capabilities and skills that we have developed in how to build websites, digital products, however you want to describe them now, and apply that logic into different ways. And I find that really interesting.
Yeah, and the more I've learned about service design, the more interesting it's been. Design thinking's been the other side of it, and it's really taken off, unfortunately, on more of the business side of things, the business and marketing side. But I think it comes from a pure place that is that the principles that we have in design translate and transmogrify. Part of the reason why service design appeals to us is because we look at that and we go, I know exactly what that is. We're just taking it into a new venue. And I've said, it's like, don't worry about the tools, because the tools are going to go away. How many of us were using Balsamic 10 years ago? I mean, Lord help us. I have in my career gone from Balsamic to OmniGraffle to Sketch, and now I'm in Figma, knowing full well that at some point along the way, those tools are going to go away and automation is going to arrive. The principles that you use to not just do design, but to convince and to move design forward are never going to go away, because end of the day, I think it's going to be a bunch of us push a button and something magical spits out of it, based upon what we tell it. I mean, I don't, we fear automation, and from my experience in the last 20-something years, the best automation has been the automation that makes humans better. And it's the automation that makes humans better at what they do. And it makes them more capable of making better decisions. There's something beautiful about being able to take a picture of somebody's desk and go, see all these Post-it notes around their monitor? That's all the ways they do to actually, this is what they have to learn in order to understand our system. How do we make it, not necessarily the Post-it notes go away, but we don't make the Post-it notes change radically a lot over time, because the frustrating thing for them is not that there are Post-it notes, it's that we keep changing the Post-it notes. We have to make a better system for them.
Yeah, if the content keeps shifting on the hacks and the shortcuts, that's just changing one problem for another. I think some of the best projects that I have ever worked on are the ones that have been driven by that mentality. And I don't know when it was, but that at some point in time, doing stakeholder interviews and user interviews, it became part of my default question set, which was to ask people about, do you happen to have a Word document kicking around that's got a load of scribbled notes in it about how to do certain things? Or have you got a load of Post-it notes on your desk and things like that?
Mm-hmm.
And it always amazes the teams that you're working with when you come back and show them and like, wow, nobody asked Sue about the secret email that she's got in draft forever that's got 500 lines of things that she has to do to hack around this really simple task. I think it's really nice. You have been quite vocal and also guided a lot of people in their careers over the years, and the approaches. We've touched upon it a lot. If you're thinking about people that you've got in your team at the moment and people that might be coming into the team in the future, what kind of skills would you like to see them having that wouldn't have been around 5 years ago, 10 years ago?
One of the things I look for, and this was around back then, but it's not a quote unquote skill. It's sort of it's another one of those soft skills. I mean, I call it tenaciousness. It's the ability to bulldog through particular problems and keep working them, keep fighting them until you get to a solution. I worked with a designer once who, brilliant designer, had flaws. I mean, could not spell to save her life. And as someone who came from a family where misspellings were a running joke, at like how much smarter we are than everybody else because we could spell. It was, one of those sort of, nails on glass sort of thing, I guess, or whatever. But the one thing she was tenacious. She had the ability to keep driving down on problems, keep persisting and asking people. I had a question about, like, is the design work that we're doing actually reaching the Chinese development team? And I just said it out loud. And about 5 minutes later, she goes, "Yes, I'm talking to one of the developers now over Slack or Teams or whatever it was." I'm like, "What?" "Yeah, I figured out who it was. I'm just hitting them up, and my Mandarin's okay. Their Mandarin's okay. We're kind of just talking back and forth." And he says that these things are happening. And I'm like, that's the sort of tenaciousness I love, is like, there's a problem. How can I solve it in a very different, novel way this time? So when I talk about that tenaciousness, that persistence, that's something I love seeing. And I talk about upside skills a lot. It's like I'm looking at a designer who may or may not have great, they may not be great at Sketch. They may not be great at running a user interview. But I go, are they people who are going to learn how? Are they going to be people who are going to persist until they get it right? Are they going to be people who just, get back up off the ground and keep going? That's what I want to see. And I tell everybody, if you show those things, I'm going to be more likely to overlook the fact that you don't have 10 years of experience. You don't have 47 years of web experience or something, or whatever it was that we used to have these job descriptions about that were so funny. Must have 10 years of web experience. It's 1999. How does that work?
I think it's still ridiculous now. If you really must have 5 years worth of experience with this job title. It's like, why? Because there's a good possibility that I was doing the prerequisites. It was just that we called it something else.
Yeah,
it's a bizarre thing.
Yeah, and I mean, even like my title is product designer. I'm product design manager. It means a different thing to different people. In other organizations, I'd be the UX manager. In other organizations, I'd be the director of design. Again, it goes back to this problem of nomenclature. On a certain level, it's like, do you really want to know which things I'm doing? So,
okay, yeah. Let's finish up on one final question for you. What roles do you think are missing at the moment within our design remit?
It's a good question. I mean, the thing is that it's less about roles that are missing and more about things that we keep forgetting. By which I mean that, like, for instance, content's a great example, right? I mean, we're seeing a greater and greater push towards content design in this industry now. And the thing that has always baffled me is how it's taken us this long to start thinking about what exactly it is we're saying on the page, or what exactly it is we're saying in copy. And I am just flabbergasted in the way when I come into a place where everything's still lorem ipsum until the end, and then they hand it to the copy editors and they go, that's not how it works. That's not how it works at all. So I like looking for. I mean, I want to have more people who actually think about content, and it doesn't have to be the content writers, but they at least are content first and they're content thoughtful. I don't think it's always true. Like, I work in enterprise. A lot of what I do is not words on a page. A lot of what I do is numbers on a page, but there's still a need to tell a story. I see a lot of designers out there who just kind of roll with it, build something and go with it. But I don't see the story that's going through it. And that's what I want to see, right? I want to be able to have you walk in and be able to say, okay, I'm a data steward for this organization. I want to be able to look at a page. I have to review whether or not we're actually in compliance. So here are the questions I'm asking, and here's what I do, and all that. When I have people do crits, that's what I actually ask them to do, is start with telling me who is using it, why they're using it, and what problem they're trying to solve. And then as you walk through the design, walk me through how this solves the problem. And when you're done, give me the questions and the issues and the gaps that you think that you see here. Because when I hear you say that, what I hear you say is not, hey, here's a nice piece of UI that we built, or here's a pretty way I did this. It's, how am I actually solving that problem? The things I'm looking for with people coming into my organization are the people who understand that in terms of content, understand that in terms of storytelling, understand that in terms of research and being able to find how that story works. And I think most of all, have that ability to have that synthesis and be able to pull all those things together. And if along the way they actually know how to use Google Analytics really well, I'm be more than happy to hire them. Or if they're people who have a really good understanding of how to build things in D3, then I'm absolutely want to hire them for what I do. But I'd rather have a total football team than I would to have one great designer who doesn't mentor and 10 designers he's just towing along. Or I'd rather have a team that is a little bit worse at what they do, but able to work really well together than I am to have a team full of really hardcore specialists who are not going to work well together. Because ultimately it's connection and communication that makes design great. Design in the end is just communication.
Very true.
Yeah.
I could talk to you forever, but I know that you've got a day to go to and enjoy some of that sunshine whilst it lasts, because the bottom line is, being in Seattle, you're either going to fall in the ocean or it's just going to get so hot that you'll just be frying eggs off of everything.
That's true. But we'll keep telling people that it's never sunny here, and they'll stay away as long as we can help them stay away.
There we have it. That's the end of the final episode of season 1 of the UX Coach podcast. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who has subscribed, everybody who has got in touch with me, whether it's by Twitter or email or through some of the many fantastic communities that we now have to our disposal. And I highly encourage everybody to join those communities as well. I want to give a big thank you to everybody within the Designer Hangout community in particular, and the Research Ops community. Most of the people that I've spoken to in this season were people who came forward from posing this question back in February. Without them, I really don't think it would have been the success that it was. I'm very open with being able to share successes and failures, and I just wanted to say that for all of the things that have gone wrong with putting this together, it hasn't detracted from the fact that nearly 3,000 people have downloaded episodes, and the vast majority of them have listened to at least 2 or 3 of those. So thank you everybody for doing that. It's been really quite wonderful, and if it has had some kind of impact on you and it has made a difference to you being able to hear some of these people's stories, and hopefully you've been able to relate to some of them, then tell other people, share that information. But most importantly, start talking about your own experiences and your own thoughts and your own questions that you have around your career, whether that's in user research, user experience design, or service design, or any of the many fields which are starting to emerge in this slightly newer landscape. I would really like to do another season of this, but in order for that to happen, it's going to require your support. I don't want money. Yes, it costs money to be able to host these episodes and to run a podcast like this, but what I want is your stories. So if you would like to share your experiences in design, then please get in touch with me at theuxcoach.com. I really hope that we get to continue this conversation and that I see some of you out on the amazing World Wide Web.